Hi, I'm Scott at ediblemusic.com. Mixing templates can help you work much more efficiently and quickly and creatively. There's this thing that can happen while you're mixing, and it happens often when you're working on a mix and you decide that you need to add some new processing or effects to a sound. So then you have to navigate over to the folder where that plugin is located. You have to remember where it is, then open it up and have to remember again how to use it. And then you can start applying the parameters and settings to the sound that you're actually working on. But those other couple of steps where you have to charge your working memory takes away from the working memory that you were using while you were mixing. So then you have to kind of refocus and readjust again. A mixing template takes that process out of the picture completely because you'll open up a mix and the processing that you would otherwise have to navigate and choose is already there waiting for you, which allows you to work faster and more creatively. So I'm going to build one for you here. I'm going to do it in Ableton. And even if you don't use Ableton, I'm going to talk through a lot of the reasoning about why I'm choosing certain processing to have ready in this template. And you can use that in your own DAW workstation as well. But for those of you in Ableton, I'm going to make it here. You can download it as well at ediblemusic.com/template. It's free. Go get it. Let's get started. We have a completely empty session here, and I'm going to add a bunch of tracks. We're going to make these the drums. Let's say kick one. I'm numbering these kick one, kick two, snare one, snare two, because you might be using layered samples, or if you're working on live drums, you might have a microphone in the kick and outside of the kick, above the snare and below the snare. It'll be flexible to whichever conditions that you're working in, whichever sounds that you're working with. And I like to make my drums red. So we have these drum tracks, and I'm going to group them into the drums group. That's our drums. I'll get some EQ set up on here. What I'm going to do when I'm adding these settings is I'm going to put them into neighborhoods where you might end up needing to, on an EQ, for example, add a boost or perform a cut. I'm going to position them. They're all going to be turned off, but I'm going to position them in such a place that you would maybe only need to adjust them a little bit, hopefully. Um, every song is different, of course, so I'm hesitant about putting in an EQ preset because that's just not going to work on anything other than the sound that it had originally been used on. If you were to take an EQ curve from one singer and try to put it onto another singer's tracks, it's just not going to work. But I want to help and give some hints about how to apply these processing that I'm adding. And so as a signal, I'm just going to give these little 0.5 boosts or cuts. Add that to the other kick as well. We'll add some compressors. Overheads might be nice to have a boost up around. So as you can see, I'm being very gentle with these just to position them in a neighborhood where you might need to perform some kind of a boost or some kind of a cut. And then you can make the necessary adjustments to make it more precise. But when you have a template and you start out with very gentle settings like this, you get to move a lot more quickly because you can see that the kinds of curves that you might want are already in there. You just need to refine them and get them more personalized to the taste of the song and the moves that you need to make for it. So we'll finish up these drums. And we'll set up some return tracks for them as well. We'll send the entirety of the drums to a parallel compressor. We'll also put a drum bus on the drums. So all of these tracks are going to feed into this, and there are a lot of creative options that you have when you're using the drum bus here. I suggest, since that we already have some processing on the individual channels, to start out a little gently with this. Do the individual channel processing first, and then turn on the drum bus, and you can change the color and the tone and the energy of the drums quite a lot using this plugin, but it'll be helpful to get the drums in a fairly good place before you plug in this drum bus. But we're also going to send it to a parallel compression channel. I'm going to set the makeup there to 12, and hopefully that will signal to you to get, well, we could even go higher, let's say 15. So you'll want the compression to reach that 15 note as you bring the threshold down. Okay? So all the drums are going there. I'll set up another one though for just the kick and snare. Send those. We'll use a glue compressor again, but we're going to change the settings. Make those red. It's useful also to have a snare reverb. And a general drums reverb. Those will also be red. Next, let's set up the bass. Bass will be blue. And I'm going to add a compressor here. I'm going to add two compressors though. The first one will be more about emphasizing the articulation of the playing, the performance of the bass, and then the second compressor will be about ensuring that it's very steady and solid throughout. But we're also going to send the bass to a parallel channel, and this is going to be bass distortion. Adding some distortion on your bass is really useful in order to give it some lift in the frequency spectrum. It helps to get the bass to come through on smaller speakers like laptops and phones and earbuds. It gives it some clarity, but it doesn't take away from the solidity of the bass in the mix either. So it's really useful to add. And what you will do is just ease it in. I'm going to set all of these send channels to -20 so that they kind of sit underneath the original channel that is sending to them. They're more of a supplementary part of the mix than something that will really stand out. And actually, I'll change all of these to -20 as well. This one will also be blue to match. We'll have a couple of tracks for guitars. And the guitars will be green. We'll group those. I'll put some EQ and some compression on there, but I'll also send them over to an instrument reverb. And this is something that guitars, keys, the arrangement will be sent to this if you want it in order to help them kind of live in a common space together. It makes it feel as though not only is it more spacious, but also that it's taking place in a particular space all together as a performance. Very useful. So I'll send the guitars to it. And I'll do the same for another group of keys, piano, synths. These will all be grouped and will be made kind of a purpley color. Not that. That'll do. Nice pastel purpley color. These are our keys. And I'll also send those to the instrument reverb. I'll add some EQ and some compression and maybe some saturation on them as well. For now, let's get the remaining groups in here. We'll add lead vocals and backup vocals. And I'll add a couple of them. See if there are doubles or stacks or something like that. Here's my color theory about designing a mixing template. Primary parts of the arrangement get primary colors. Secondary parts of the arrangement get secondary colors. So usually the drums, the bass, the vocals, those are the three most important parts of the mix. Could be the guitars, could be the keys, depending on the song. But if those three are present, then usually those are important. And so they get primary colors. The others are not unimportant, but a little less important or complementary, then they get the other colors, the secondary colors. So the background vocals will get orange. And I'll make a few of these as well. And on both of these vocal groups, I'm going to give you some EQ suggestions, some compression suggestions. They'll want to be processed usually in a group. If you're working on the background vocals, it's helpful to put on a delay or a chorus or something like that collectively instead of on the individual groups. So you might want to do some of your sends from this group, and I'll set it up that way for you. Let's add several tracks for spatial effects. What I'm going to do, so the instrument reverb is more of a shorter reverb, a room sound, but you'll want to also have a couple of reverbs and a couple of delays going. Sometimes it's more useful and sounds better because it maintains the clarity of the program element. Sometimes it's more useful to add a delay instead of a reverb. It gives it some spaciousness around it. It pushes it forward in the speakers a little bit, and it doesn't have that long reverb tail that can sometimes cause some trouble among other elements in the mix. So I'll add some reverbs, but I'll also add some delays that you could send some vocals to. Excuse me. I'll add some delays which you could add some vocals to, but I'll also add some delays that you could send the instruments to. You can use either a short delay or a long delay. And with all of these as well, we'll turn it down to -20 and give them the same color as the vocals. Great. On the master, all I'm going to add here is a limiter. This is for safety. When you want to print your mix out, you can add some gain only then, only when you're ready to print it out, and try to get it close to there. But this sealing will help to protect your ears and your speakers in case something really loud happens. It will make sure that it only gets to a certain level and doesn't endanger either your monitoring system or your hearing system either. Now we're going to add a few more tracks here. The workflow that I've designed so far goes from the tracks to their groups, and now we'll bring them to the buses. So everything will kind of funnel downwards until it gets to the master. Let's get those buses set up first though. This one will be called Rhythm. The next one, Instruments. Vocals, and effects. So I'm going to route the drums and the bass into the rhythm bus, all the instruments into the instruments bus, all the vocals into the vocal bus, and then the reverbs that and delays that are on the send and return channels, those will go into the effects bus. So if there's ever a point where you feel as though there's a problem happening in your mix, you're not sure where it's coming from. Maybe it might be coming from a reverb or a delay setting, and the program element just isn't interacting very kindly with it. You can just turn off this effects channel and hear the dry version of the mix and check to see whether or not it has gone away. Or you could solo the effects channel to make sure that all the reverbs and delays themselves are interacting nicely together. But it's a nice way to get that funnel almost to the end point. You've got the tracks, they'll feed into the groups. You could do some group processing there. Then you'll have the buses, which you could do some additional light processing there. I think maybe I'll add just some very light EQ suggestions and some very light compression suggestions, and then those will go out to the master track. Now I'm going to add some extra little treats in there as well, but I hope that you can see how useful it is to have a well-organized mixing template ready for you whenever you're about to start mixing. One that is organized by color, that's labeled, but especially that has all the routing and processing set up ready for you to use so that you don't have to go through that distracting process of navigating around the workstation, trying to find the effect that you want to use, bringing it in, adjusting the parameters. If you have those that you use often, put them into your template and then give them the settings that generally apply to most of the songs that you're working on. But we're just all you have to do is remind yourself that you just have to make some finer adjustments to it, but you don't have to distract yourself by coming away from the mixing and then coming back to it again. But I hope that you have found this useful because it's really helpful to have a well-organized mixing template, one that is logically color-coded, that's labeled, that has all the routing and effects and processing set up for you and ready to go so that you don't have to go through that distracting process of navigating around the workstation and then coming back to the mix that you're working on. Make your workstation your own. It's not something that you have to treat as just this empty thing. It's very similar to a word processor that whenever you open up Word, it'll have a default font and a default font size. All of these things are a kind of a template for you to be able to start writing right away. Or if you play video games, I play video games, then your familiarity with the controller, with what the buttons do and where they're all located, you have this working memory to be able to pick up a controller and play a game pretty much right away because they all utilize the template of the button mapping on the controller. Much like that, make your workstation your own. It's not an empty space. You can personalize it and make it as efficient as you want to. And since this is in Ableton, what you can do is you can also pull out parts of a template. So if you pick this up and you're working on parts that you already have some plugins and presets that you like, then you can just pull out part of what I made here and add it to your own. But don't undervalue the usefulness of a template. Pick this one up if you want to at ediblemusic.com/template. Try it out. Have fun.